All right, time for the New Hampshire pregame show. Interesting thing going on with the Democrats in New Hampshire before I get to the Republican primary, which is the main event tonight. As I talked about last year, the DNC changed around their primary schedule. They pretty much canceled the Iowa caucus for all intents and purposes. They no longer made it, the first event of the primary season. And they did the same to New Hampshire. They took away New Hampshire's early primary. In fact, so they're starting with South Carolina. That's the long and the short of it. Now, does this really matter? Was Joe Biden going to lose? Well, now we see no, because RFK Jr. is out of the running, and the two people left is Marianne Williamson and I guess some other guy that nobody's ever heard of, like Harry Dean Stanton or something. I know that's not his name. Dean Phillips. I think it's Dean Phillips. So nobody's. Joe Biden is not going to lose a primary. But they were so worried because Joe Biden is so weak. And because Joe Biden has never won Iowa in his life, despite running for president like 4 times. He's never won Iowa. And they were, I guess, shaky on his support in New Hampshire. And so they panicked and they said, oh my God, we got to punitively take away the primary from these 2 states because they may have the gall to vote against Joe Biden if there's another option. It's truly remarkable to me that the DNC is just, that they don't even care about their own institutions because, the primary system is an institution of the parties. This is something that the parties are supposed to care about and uphold. And you have the Democrats just completely shredding their own primary. Now, anyway, even though the DNC said, we're not going to let New Hampshire have their primary, unfortunately, primary elections are run not by political parties. They are officially sanctioned by state governments. And so New Hampshire law says that New Hampshire has to hold its primary before any other state. That is the law. And so even though the Democratic Party says that the first Democratic primary is going to be South Carolina, New Hampshire's holding their election tonight anyway. But Joe Biden's name is not going to be on the ballot. Joe Biden is boycotting New Hampshire. I guess he just hates that state for some reason. I don't get it. I don't see how this helps him to boycott the state of New Hampshire. But they're going to hold a primary without him. And so the winner is going to be either Dean Phillips or Marianne Williamson. Unless a bunch of people write in Joe Biden's name, which is possible. But either way, New Hampshire is not going to have any delegates at the Democratic convention. The Democratic Party of New Hampshire does not get to have a say in who is the Democratic nominee, even though everyone knows it's going to be Joe Biden anyway. And so if you're a Democrat, similar to what happened in Iowa, you don't really have much going on tonight. Actually, yes, tonight, isn't it? It's Monday. It's not Tuesday. I think it's tonight. And so since you kind of can't go in, you're not having a real primary in New Hampshire. It doesn't count for anything, and Joe Biden's name isn't even on the ballot. There may be some Democrats, since New Hampshire is an open primary state. Anyone can vote in either primary. You don't have to be registered to any particular political party. I would think, there's a good chance, a lot of Democrats might decide to vote in the Republican Party, or in the Republican primary, for one Nikki Haley. After all, I think she appeals much more to Joe Biden voters, as we found out in Iowa. Nearly a majority of Nikki Haley supporters who caucused for her in Iowa, who actually went there and voted for her in the Iowa caucuses, they were Joe Biden voters, 43%. And so in a place like New Hampshire, I would think there's a chance that is, now that she's more prominent, now that, you see DeSantis out of the way, it looks like, this would be a big deal to stick it to the orange man, to have him lose the New Hampshire primary, even though Trump is going to be the nominee. He was always going to be the nominee. There's nothing that they can do to stop that electorally. The only thing they could do to stop it is, imprisoning him, and then the RNC coming in and crowning Nikki Haley the nominee, similar to what John Kasich was hoping for. He was hoping that if he just stuck around, he just kept his name out there, that perhaps the RNC would decide to dump Trump and make John Kasich the candidate for president. That was John Kasich's whole strategy. He didn't go anywhere, but he wanted to be there. He wanted to be available, which I've heard that's also what DeSantis wanted to do. But at this point, DeSantis was just I guess probably feeling so humiliated that he didn't want to do that anymore. He didn't want to turn into John Kasich. Of course, he'd have to get a lot worse to really turn into John Kasich, because John Kasich's politics was, that was the real negative when it came to his candidacy. God, he sucked. But anyway, I also want to talk about the trap. Wait, didn't I already talk about how I think that if Trump was manipulated into or was dumb enough to pick Nikki Haley to be his vice president, that they would just replace him as president with Nikki Haley? I think that, in Joe Biden's case, Trump's best chance at becoming the president and staying president for all 4 years is by picking a vice president that is intolerable to the deep state and to the uniparty, because that person will serve as a human shield and will ensure that they will, as long as that person is vice president, not remove Trump from office, because they wouldn't, lest he be replaced by someone who is as bad or worse. This is sort of the Spiro Agnew problem. The deep state really wanted to take down Richard Nixon. What was the problem? Spiro Agnew was in the way. They didn't like Richard Nixon, but for whatever reason, I wasn't alive back then. I don't really know much about Spiro Agnew. I know they hated Spiro Agnew more. And so they had to take him out first. They did. They got Spiro Agnew to resign. And who did they replace Spiro Agnew with? Well, it was none other than a total uniparty, company man shill himself, Gerald R. Ford, from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And as soon as Gerald Ford was sworn in as vice president, well, then all the Watergate stuff hit. And they forced Nixon out, and they got their man in Washington. It was a total coup. And they will do the exact same thing to Trump, except they will be more forceful because they know that Trump will not resign. They will have to take more extreme measures. If Trump allows them to install a fifth columnist as his vice president, and if Trump is imprisoned sometime between now and the election, the RNC will take the data of Nikki Haley being, let's say, second place. Let's say they have this whole primary and people keep voting for Nikki Haley, always a minority, small minority, but something. If Donald Trump is thrown in prison, the RNC can come back and say, well, gee, our candidate is in prison, and so we can't very well, try and run him on the ballot. It's just not reasonable. It's not practical, even if it is theoretically legal to do so. We can't do that. And so, well, let's look back. Okay, who was the second choice of the voters after Donald Trump? Because we want to be as fair as possible. We, the RNC, we don't want to just install some random person to replace our nominee. No, we need to go with the person who had the people's vote, second. And that inevitably will be Nikki Haley now that Ron DeSantis is gone. Nikki Haley is going to start coming in second place in these primaries that to us right now might seem meaningless, but later on could be cited. In fact, she could have delegates, a bunch of delegates that representing her at the convention. And they could argue this, let's say by then, let's say maybe by the convention, once the convention's usually August, perhaps they're hoping that Il Donaldo Trumpo will have been convicted of some kind of crime and been sentenced to prison, house arrest, something like that. And so I think the threat of the deep state and the military-industrial complex completely seizing 100% control, because it's not like they ever lost all control of the Republican Party. Most Republican politicians are very much in line with the regime. They are firmly in the regime's camp. They are apparatchiks of the regime. And so the threat is now greater than ever. They're going to try and completely drive out the insurgent wing of the Republican Party that nominated Trump in 2016 and 2020, and replace him with an anti-white, pro-war merchant of death who, while virtue signaling about how much she struggled living under racism in the Deep South, a million years ago in the 1990s, the very racist 1990s. She will be raining down hellfire, death, and destruction on brown people around the world. But it's okay, because you see, Nikki Haley is now a woman of color, even though she didn't used to, portray herself that way. She didn't brag about, being non-white, but now she loves to talk about how non-white she is to her self-hating white audience, because this gives her the credibility she needs in order to bomb other brown people back into the Stone Age. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.